Starting now.
I'm sorry.
Welcome, everyone, for another fun-filled installment of the Land Use and Ethics Committee. You cannot spell luminaries without LUE. And I will be your host again. We have a fun-filled agenda. We have 30 minutes to accomplish it. We're going to try to move quickly as possible. First bill is HB 38 from Delegate Edelson and from the Baltimore City delegation. It is basically a reintroduction of a Montgomery County local bill that we passed last year. I believe the House actually passed it unanimously, except that it applies to Baltimore City instead of Baltimore County. It relates to off-street parking requirements near mass transit and basically says that the local government of Baltimore City can't require parking minimums. In other words, letting the sort of free market decide how many parking spots will be required of new residential developments near rail stations, which, as you can see, is defined in the bill as 0.2, a quarter mile from a MARC station, a Baltimore MTA light rail station, or a red line station, regardless of transit mode. And that's obviously sort of looking ahead to the future in the event we are successful in building the red line. There are no amendments. Is there?
No, there are amendments.
Oh, there are amendments. Okay, Patrick, go ahead. Sorry.
The amendments mostly mirror what MDOT asked for. They allow for all transit modes, as you said. They allow it if residential use is part-time, a little different from Montgomery last year, where it was a residential area. For mixed use. I think we heard a little bit out on the floor today. And then they add metro stations, Baltimore metro stations, as stations that qualify for this.
Got it. Any thoughts on this bill or on those amendments that Patrick just read out?
Move the amendments, Mr. Chair.
Second.
The amendments have been properly moved and seconded. Any discussion on the amendments? Seeing none, all in favor of the amendment signify by saying aye or raise your hand.
Aye.
Anyone opposed to the amendments? The amendments carry. Any discussion on the bill?
Move the bill, Mr. Chair.
As amended, second.
The bill has been moved and seconded as amended. Any final discussion on the bill before we vote? Seeing no hands, all those in favor of the bill as amended, please raise your hand or signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Anyone opposed? Great. House Bill 38 is going to receive a favorable recommendation from the subcommittee. We're going to move on to, I believe it's HB 834, Calvert County local bill on ethics. And I'm happy to pass it off to explain what's been going on here. There is one amendment. This came in from the Calvert County delegation. My understanding is that we have a letter from the Calvert County delegation approving the amendment. The commissioners in Calvert County are also in favor of this. We have one of Calvert County's own proud sons here as a subcommittee member. So I'm happy to defer to either Patrick, to Delegate Long, or to Dia to explain what's going on here. Yeah, Delegate Long.
I would just say Delegate Long. Yeah.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'll just quickly, for the sake of time, just say that there was an occurrence where there are members who were serving on local bodies of government in Calvert County that were voting on matters that came before them, and there were no mechanisms in place in which the Board of County Commissioners were able to deal with that accordingly, conflicts of interest, as well as it went to a higher court, and they recommended that something would be put in place in the realm of local government. And so with that, I will just defer to council if there's any technical explanations that they want to offer. And again, thank you all for your support for Calvert's local bill.
Thank you, Delegate Long. Before we turn to Dia, we can take Delegate Holmes.
Yes, Mr. Chair. That's what I wanted to ask if Dia Daly was.
Perfect.
Thank you. Her opinion on the bill. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Dia, go ahead.
So basically what the bill does, it requires Calvert County to adopt certain provisions of law related to judicial enforcement of county ethics commission decisions. And that's basically the bill would require Calvert County to track the state provisions there. As introduced, the bill would have required any elected official in Calvert County who was found to have violated the conflict of interest provisions in the county to be expelled from office. There was a little bit of a concern that could potentially result in someone being expelled for a relatively minor violation. Someone accept a $21 t-shirt, the gift cap is $20, you're expelling someone because the t-shirt was worth $1 more than an acceptable gift. So the amendments have a couple provisions in there. First, they say that the Calvert County's conflict of interest provisions must include a provision that authorizes the governing body, the county commissioners, to remove a county elected official from office for violating the ethics law. It's authorization only, not a mandate. The amendments also require the county's ethics provisions to require that if the County Ethics Commission recommends that a county commissioner be expelled from office, that recommendation is public. So if the county commissioners choose not to accept that recommendation, the public would be aware that the Ethics Commission thought this member should be expelled.
Thanks, Tia. That's super helpful. And yeah, I mean, my understanding of this is that basically we would not only, number one, for the first time ever, be sort of micromanaging the ethics laws of a specific county, and forcing them to remove people for de minimis violations. But then secondly, we'd be forcing them to hold them to a standard that we're not even holding ourselves to, because I think the odds that a member of the General Assembly would be expelled or even honestly censured for a very, very minor conflict of interest violation is essentially zero. Is that fair to say, Dia?
Correct. I'd note that, if we look at the state level, if the Ethics Committee makes a recommendation that a member of the General Assembly be expelled, let's say one of you does something truly awful, the Ethics Committee says, hey, this person should be expelled. The Ethics Committee doesn't have the authority to expel that individual. Instead, the full General Assembly must vote to do so. So, this would track the process at the General Assembly.
Yeah, thank you, Dia. Again, that's really helpful. Delegate Davis.
Thank you, Dia. You answered one of my questions about whether the Ethics Commission has the authority to expel. But my second question is, what are other counties doing throughout the state?
So I will say I am not aware of any other county or municipality that requires an Ethics Commission recommendation to be public. Without having reviewed the charters and codes of every jurisdiction in the state, I would assume that most have the same provisions, a similar provision to the ones we have at the state level that says each house is the judge of the qualifications of its members and can sanction their members. I would assume that most counties have similar provisions in their charters. So I would argue, I would guess that most counties could vote to remove a member, but I don't know for sure. I'd have to research that.
Yeah, I kind of have problems with voting to expel. In this case, the Ethics Commission recommended expulsion. Is that true?
I'm going to defer to Delegate Long on that one.
Thank you. And again, this matter of concern, it goes back to an occurrence that happened on the Board of County Commissioners before I was even a candidate for office or in office. And in short, it's pretty public. There was a member of the Board of County Commissioners that during their zoning and their county concept plans chose to exempt a piece of land from the county zoning requirements so that he would not be subject to it and so that he could be able to then sell it at a more premium rate. And so the Board of County Commissioners had to deal with that in some respect, but they were limited with what they could do in scope.
Did the Ethics Commission recommend expulsion?
Delegate Davis, I don't have the answer for your question. As I forestated, this predates my coming into office, and this happened about a few years ago.
All right.
Delegate Davis, the testimony states that they issued a letter of censure.
So the Ethics Commission recommended a letter of expulsion. So then my question becomes,
No, he said censure. Sorry, Delegate Davis.
I'm
Patrick
sorry,
said censure.
they recommended a letter of censure. Thank you. So I guess my last question is, this bill as amended, would it allow expulsion when the Ethics Committee recommends censure?
Yes, but I think that's existing law, and I think every county's decision-making body would already be empowered to go against the recommendation of an ethics commission. This doesn't really break any new ground in that department. So just like we could go against the recommendations of our ethics commission on the General Assembly on the House floor, similarly, every county's governing body, whether that's a council or a commission or whatever, can always go against the recommendation of an ethics committee, both under the status quo and if this bill passes. Dia, is that right?
Correct. That's my understanding as well. We certainly have had, I'm trying to think about when the Ethics Committee has made recommendations to the floor. We have had internal discussions. Could a member of the General Assembly introduce a different resolution? Yes, you could. And we certainly could have a situation where the Ethics Committee makes a recommendation for, let's say, a reprimand, and on the House floor, somebody says, I'd like to amend this to make it a censure.
Yeah, it's really just like any other standing committee's recommendation, Delegate Davis. I mean, the Environment and Transportation Committee is likely to give a favorable report and a favorable recommendation on this bill, for example, to the House floor. But that doesn't mean that we can't amend the bill on the House floor, or we could actually, it doesn't happen very often, but we could reject that recommendation on the House floor as well. It's similar here. Ethics committees are just smaller groups of experts, but that doesn't mean that the larger body who they're providing recommendations to have to listen to them. And that's not going to change with this bill.
Got it. If I may, this is a state ethics commission, correct?
This is the Calvert County's Ethics Commission.
Ah, okay.
Yep.
Thank you.
Okay.
So
Any other discussion? Oh, yeah, sorry.
Each county has their own ethics commission. They have conflict of interest. They have disclosure requirements, rules that generally track the state law. And that's the only interaction the state has over the county ethics laws. The state makes sure that their laws track the state law, but how they interpret it, how they administer it is up to the county ethics commission.
Great. Thanks, Tia. Delegate Davis, I'm going to assume that's a stale hand that's raised.
Since it's up, can I? So I served as a county commissioner for 8 years, and I remember something very similar happening with one of our county commissioners. And so I want to say that I understand the bill. I understand it, and I think that there should be something able to do. I have the only balancing thing I have is, I don't know, getting rid of someone who's been duly elected, and so.
No, I agree. That's why the amendment is here. So I think we all, regardless of what level of government we're on, should be very, very careful about overruling the will of the voters. And when they elect someone, we should always be very careful about expulsion. That's why I believe the General Assembly has never expelled anyone. And this bill came in with us basically requiring Calvert County to expel people, including for de minimis conflicts of interest violations. Now, I think in this particular case, it was a pretty egregious conflict of interest violation, to be fair. And that's why Calvert County got riled up about it, because I believe this gentleman was not expelled and it was a pretty severe violation. But the bill as it came in would have made us require the county to always expel for even minor ones, as Dia described. And so that's why the amendment is here. Delegate Foley.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So Dia described that the what I heard her say was that the ethics commission in these counties operates on their own, that the state involvement is just to allow this to happen. But is that true in both commission counties and charter counties?
I believe so. Dia?
Correct.
Yes.
They all have their own ethics commissions. And then some municipalities also have ethics commissions depending on their size and duties.
Okay, thank you.
All right, thanks.
In terms of ethics, I think it's easy to say that the state has usurped the field.
Yeah, right. Okay, any other further discussions? on
Move the amendment, Mr. Chair.
All right. Is there a second on the amendment?
Second.
Okay, any last thoughts on the amendment? Seeing none, all those in favor of the amendment signify by saying aye, raise your hand.
Aye.
Aye.
Any opposed to the amendment? Seeing none, any
Move
final
the bill as
discussion on the
amended, Mr.
bill?
Chair.
All right, and is there a second on the bill?
Second.
Any final discussion on the bill as amended? Seeing none, all in favor of the bill as amended, raise your hand or signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Any opposed to the bill as amended? Seeing none, this bill 834 will also receive a favorable recommendation from the subcommittee, and Patrick can run over to natural resources now.
Thank you,
Thanks,
Mr.
Dia.
Chairman.
Thanks very much, Dia, as always, for weighing in. We greatly value your expertise, and thanks, Patrick, for pinch hitting in 2 different committees today. Okay, we're now going to move on to, I believe, House Bill 577. This bill, y'all will probably remember, I think it had at least in my view, had a pretty memorable hearing, but it's been heavily amended. So this bill came in, basically the impetus here is that there's very little regulations and there's no licensing for homeless shelters in the state of Maryland. I believe we're somewhat of an outlier, at least on the East Coast for this. I know a number of our neighbors do have licensing regimes for homeless shelters akin to basically, business licensure. But we don't. And so the sponsor wanted to provide, I think, a pretty robust, and DHCD also wanted to provide a pretty robust licensing program. As you can see, all this language has been stricken. And the reason it was stricken is not because we don't care about this issue. In fact, I think the opposite. There are a number of members of the subcommittee who came to me personally and told me how moved they were by the testimony for this bill. However, there were also some questions and concerns about how broad the applicability was going to be. And maybe more importantly, it had a massive fiscal note. So the fiscal note ended up being, I think, $400,000 or more. So we didn't think appropriations was going to have the appetite for that. We worked with the sponsor and with DHCD to come up with this amendment, which is before you, and it's a study. DHCD has promised us that this study will cost less than $100,000. So that's why we don't need appropriations approval. And as you can see, the language here is basically just studying the establishment of a homeless shelter licensing program. So it's going to be looking at the current rules around habitability and emission standards. They're going to recommend standards. They're not going to apply them themselves. They would still have to come back to the General Assembly. So we're not abrogating any power or autonomy we currently have, but they are going to recommend a plan to us, and they're going to report their findings by next summer, July 1, 2025. So I would expect in the 2026 session, this issue will be back before us, and we'll have another bite at the apple to see if we want to move in any direction based on the results of the study. I think we're going to have a lot of stakeholder input, probably at both the agency level and the General Assembly level, because we heard from a lot of folks who run shelters, including domestic violence shelters and whatnot, that they fear overly restrictive regulations. And so I think in the future we're going to be asked to sort of craft some sort of middle ground licensing program that keeps the bad actors at bay while also letting all the good actors continue to thrive. But that issue is not before us today. What's before us today is whether we want to do a study or not. Any thoughts?
Move the amendment, Mr. Chair.
All right. Is there a second? And then we can open up for more discussion. Is there a second? Can I get a second on the amendment first?
Second.
All right. So the amendment, which is the study language, has been moved in second, and it looks like we got some hands. So we'll start with Delegate Foley.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So I know this is just a study, but and I support the bill, but my question is, do we know, are homeless shelters, this is sort of something I've never heard of, but maybe I just haven't paid attention, right? Are homeless shelters licensed elsewhere, like in other states, or?
Yeah, the answer to that is yes. Many other states have licensing regimes for homeless shelters. And what I also did not note that is important to note is that for a homeless shelter that receives federal funding, which is at least a few of them, I don't have the percentage of which ones have federal funding or whatever. I'll probably look that up before this hits the floor. But for the ones that receive federal funding, there are already federal guidelines around habitability and emissions. So I think one option that will maybe eventually be on the table is how much do we want to mirror the federal standards for those that don't receive federal funding? But again, that's not in front of us today. It's just a study. Delegate Naraki.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. In the study, and it could just be because maybe it's somewhere else in the bill and not in this amendment, or maybe this amendment is the entire bill now. Are we?
This is the entire bill. This is the entire bill.
Okay,
Yeah.
gotcha. Could we include language that consults local governments? Because I think that's important to get there, or at least include them in the study somehow, because that's a very important, I think, to have their feedback and their buy-in and how this is administered.
Yeah, I mean, I think that is important. But I think here's my concern. We're already, I think, going to be pushing up against the fiscal note here. And I think if we require DHCD to kind of do broad stakeholder engagement, as well as basically just keep their head down and do this study, I worry we're going to exceed the fiscal note, and then we're going to have to slow this bill down and go to appropriations. I think I would rather, I totally agree with the thought here, which is that we want the counties to be part of this picture. We want all the stakeholders, including those that currently operate homeless shelters, because I think this is really not a partisan or ideological issue at all. I think everybody wants these shelters to be safe, but we also don't want to provide so many rules and regulations on top of them they can't exist, because they're obviously serving a really important function. So I would worry that that's going to be a much more extensive operation, and they're going to need more than one pin, because right now the DHCD has told us this is just one pin. If they've got to go out and go to engage with every single county or a bunch of different counties before summer 2025, I'm worried that's going to be 2 or 3 pins, and then all of a sudden we've got a fiscal note problem. What I will say, though, is that they're just going to report back a study. I think it's really on us as the lawmaking body here to do our consultation with counties, have them at the table both in future subcommittee meetings and at the bill hearing to decide whether they like what the recommendations are. Does that make sense?
That makes sense, Mr. Chair. Thank you.
Okay. All right. I appreciate the thought, though. I mean, it is really important. All right. Seeing no other questions, we do have a motion on the amendment in a second. So all those in favor of the amendments, which is what is before you, please raise your hand or signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? All right. And then on the bill as amended, which again is basically the exact same vote. Any final discussion? Yeah, we have a motion. Let's get a second first, if we could.
Second.
Okay, Delegate Davis. Yeah, Delegate Davis, go ahead. Are you voting yes, or you want to say something? Oh, she's voting. Okay, never mind. All right. Any further discussion that doesn't involve people voting? Okay, all those in favor of the bill as amended, please raise your hand and signify by saying aye.
Aye.
All right, there we go. You'd think I could pick up on nonverbal cues by now, but not quite. Okay. Anyone opposed? All right. This bill 577 is also going to receive a favorable recommendation from the subcommittee. So now we're going to go on to I believe our final bill of the day. I wish we had a little bit more time to discuss it. We only have about 7 minutes left before we're overcome by motor vehicles and transportation. So we're not going to be able to delve into this, but the good news is we've got a few more weeks to do this. I do not think that the plan, if we do decide to move forward with this bill, which is the governor's zoning bill, which is what I colloquially call it, but it's House Bill 538. The full title is the Housing Expansion and Affordability Act of 2024. This bill is obviously long and substantial. There's a number of different amendments that were both recommended to us at the hearing stage and also that have come in later. We have time to digest this and to digest the amendments, so I don't want anyone to be thinking that we're going to be rushing the process. We did want to go ahead and start it today. I wish we had a little bit more time, but we'll do the best we can. So rather than getting into any of the amendments, I think I'd rather just sort of briefly walk through the bill myself, and then maybe we can take an initial question or two if that sounds good. Everyone's cool with that plan? Okay. All right. So yeah, Darren or Colleen, you can just start scrolling. So this bill encompasses a variety of different issues. I'll try to go in order here on the bill as we scroll down. Okay, we'll start here. This is the manufactured homes section, and we have a couple of different options in front of us here. Obviously, one option is always to strike parts of the bill, but other than that, what this basically says is that local jurisdictions can't bar the placement of new manufactured homes in single-family zoned residential communities. And the two amendments that are in front of us, and again, we don't have to go back and forth on this. I just want to talk through the various options as best we can in the limited time we have. But Manufactured term housing is a term of art that includes a lot of different types of non-stick built housing, and it includes both modular homes and what people more colloquially refer to as mobile homes or trailers. And a couple of options here that are on the table for us is either making more explicit that this includes modular housing. Now, modular housing is off-built manufactured homes that are then brought to another place and generally don't really look any different. Whether we want to add that to the definition, to make sure everyone knows that's what we're talking about. Another option would be striking manufactured homes and replacing it with modular homes, which would basically eliminate the inclusion of mobile homes into this bill. And then obviously we could keep it as is. So those are the options on the table. I don't think we necessarily need to go through them yet, but I just want to preview the discussion that's to come. All right, let's keep scrolling and try to see how much we can fit in here in the next couple of minutes. So these are some definitions. We can keep going. There are some issues with, for example, this unreasonable test here, this unreasonable limitation or requirement test. So I'll just mention that briefly, that we will get into that a little bit more when we discuss this bill in more detail. All right, we can keep going. All right, so this is kind of the heart of the bill here, which is that you can keep scrolling. Is basically what this bill does at its core is it defines what is a qualified project, and then it gives a bunch of different perks and benefits to things that fit under the definition of qualified project. So you can keep scrolling, but basically what to keep in mind here is that we're talking about, let's go down page 8 here. There we go. So this is kind of the core of the bill starting here, which is that the first part of qualified project is projects that are close to rail stations and include at least 25% of the units that are affordable to those making 60% of the area median income. So that's the first bucket of qualified projects that we should all keep in mind. All right, keep scrolling. The second bucket is right here. And that is for projects that are controlled or owned by nonprofits, 501c3 organizations. They would also get all the perks in the bill if they have 50% affordable. That's how the bill came in. Now, obviously, we may tweak a variety of different things of this, but I just want people to be familiar with the bill as it came in. All right, and then keep scrolling. The third definition of qualified project is, well, we may have skipped it, actually. Okay. Control F for campus. Maybe, okay. Well, I don't know. I thought that was the term of art here. Well, I would just state it based on so based on basically it's formerly state-owned campuses are also the third category here, and it's also at 50% affordable. Hey Barry, welcome.
I've been here trying to get on.
Oh, okay.
Sorry.
It's okay.
I can't get it.
Okay, so this is the state-owned campus thing here. So property that was formerly owned by the state consists of more than one building and includes at least one building that was built more than 50 years before the date of the application for the project. So that's the campus. It doesn't use the word campus, but this is like formerly state-owned property. So those are the three categories. Then we can keep scrolling down. Thanks for finding that. And you can, go back up a little bit. So this is some of the perks here. So I believe, let's see. So this talks about kind of the perks that you get, and there are basically there are a few. There's a density bonus perk. There's also an expedited hearing perk if you fit into the definition of qualified project. And then if you want to keep scrolling down, this part will become part of the conversation. So you can stop there. That's this 7505 section here. It says a local jurisdiction may not impose any unreasonable limitation or requirements on a qualified project. And then it lists a bunch of things that could be unreasonable limitations. That will come up later because there are some concerns expressed by some of the stakeholders about this language about unreasonable limitation. But the reasoning here is that this kind of section is often in bills like this because we do not want, if we want to pass the bill and do the things that the bill wants to do, we don't want to essentially provide loopholes for counties to get around it. And this section is really kind of an anti-loophole provision to prevent counties from essentially doing things to unreasonably frustrate the intent of the bill. One analogy would honestly be kind of the floor discussion we had today about cannabis, right? There's a provision in the cannabis law that has similar language to this about counties that kind of unreasonably restrict the placement of cannabis locations, cannabis dispensaries. Okay, keep scrolling down. We're almost to the end. I may have skipped a couple here but I just wanted to give you guys a little bit of a taste. Here's another provision about qualified projects. This is again about public hearings, and it says that it cannot be reviewed by more than one public hearing if you're a qualified project before each of the following. So it limits it to this would limit it to basically 4 public hearings, one in front of each of these bodies at a maximum. All right, keep scrolling. We'll talk about that section next week as well, or later this week probably. And then this is the final section. This is on pages 12 and 13, and this has to do with facility law, or also called APFO. APFO laws essentially allow local jurisdictions to deny housing permits if their public facilities can't handle it, either their schools, their road, their sewers, et cetera. And what this section of the bill says is that a local jurisdiction can't use an APFO law to deny a permit if it's a state-funded affordable housing project, or otherwise unreasonably restrict the development of a project if it's a state-funded, basically at either the federal level or the state level, a DHCD-funded project. So they would still have some oversight over these types of projects, and this is a little bit separated out from the qualified project part of the bill. So you kind of have you really have 3 components. You have manufactured housing, you have qualified projects, what they are and what they get, and then you have APFO. So that's my very brief. I'm sure all the DHCD and the governor's staff is cringing at how terrible I did there, but I just wanted to go as quickly as possible and just take it on myself because I know that some of us have to move over to motor vehicles and transportation momentarily. But with that, we can have a little bit of an abbreviated discussion if anyone has any questions for now. Okay, seeing none, we will come back to this. Don't worry. I just wanted to give everyone a little bit of a taste and a flavor. We have a lot more to do on this bill. We have amendments from a lot of different stakeholders. We have amendments from people on this subcommittee. And so if you have any questions or concerns, obviously you're welcome to bring those to me individually, but stay tuned. This bill will take up by far the bulk of our work as a subcommittee from now until crossover and even after crossover as well. So buckle up. Thank you all again. Sorry we ran a little bit over. I hope everyone can get a bite to eat before the 3:15 bill hearing. Thank you all.